Hey there, it's Dr. Tom with EBM Fitness Solutions, and we're going to break down squats, why they might be causing you knee pain, and how to get you out of pain while doing the squats. So squatting is basically the same idea as sitting and standing, something you're going to do every single day, multiple times every day. So it's kind of important to understand how to do it, and if it's painful, how to make it better. Hopefully we'll make it less painful. In the ideal situation, we'll take the pain away completely, because a lot of times the pain you experience is from moving incorrectly. It's not always that your knees are bad or squats hurt your knees, that you're doing the squats incorrectly, and that's why they hurt your knees. So something to keep in mind, if you have pain literally all the way through the motion, top to bottom, all the way through, and it's just there constantly, there's two options for you really. Jump ahead to the deloading lesson, where we talk about how to deload your squat to see what's going on with the knees, or you need to go actually be evaluated by a physical therapist or somebody else to see what's going on with the knees. We're gonna break down pain in different parts of the motion, whether it's one knee, both knees, the bottom position, a bunch of other little things that can happen, but if pretty much you're struggling through the entire motion, try deloading it. If that doesn't work, then a lot of these other tips are not going to be helpful for you. You actually need a little bit more of a thorough evaluation to assess what's going on with your knees. So you're having some knee pain during squats. What's one of the first things you should do? You should take the movement and you should deload it to get more information about what's going on with your knees. So the great thing about deloading a lower body movement, and even upper body movements for what that's worth, is that it makes the movement easier for the muscles, it makes it easier for the joint. So if sitting and standing or kind of squatting like this is painful for you, but you deload the movement, you use something to help, like a band or pulleys, then it gives us information that your knees are probably not the problem. That when we deload the movement and the pain goes away, that your problem is more muscular and movement based, which is encouraging. It's actually good news that structurally your knee is actually fine. It's how you're doing the movement that's actually contributing, causing your pain. So what do deloaded squats look like? So check out these two videos here. So you can see one of them uses a heavy resistance or strength band, and then the other uses just a pulley apparatus. So the idea here is to have a big enough band or enough tension on the pulleys to help you through the motion, right? The idea is if it's too light, you're not getting enough assistance. The goal is that the deloading should help make the movement easier. And then if your pain goes away, then that's actually good news, it's good information. Now, what happens if you deload and the pain is still there? Well, it doesn't mean that you can't squat, but at that point, what I would suggest is you meet with somebody, talk with somebody, get further evaluation on your knees, or at least have that person break down your squat technique a little bit more. You know, deloading is great, but there may be some other nuanced things that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing, or that you're not doing that you should be doing, that can be broken down and assessed by somebody who knows what they're doing and knows what to look for. So while deloading is great, it's only good to a certain point, and you may need some additional evaluation on your knees if the pain still persists after the deload. So let's say you're squatting down, you get to the bottom position here, and that's where you feel your knee pain. It might actually go away as you come back up, but in that bottom position, the knees kind of talk back a little bit, and they're a little cranky when you're in that position. What does that mean? It can mean a few different things. The first thing we're gonna look at is the transition from that down phase coming back up during the squat. So a lot of times what happens is people go too quick, and then they lose all their tension. The muscles, they kind of, not necessarily relax, but they lose some of the tension, and then their body position changes as they start coming back up. They will oftentimes regain their position on the way back up, but that transition from bottom to coming back up is where people lose the tension in their muscles, and that can actually contribute to some of the knee pain you may be experiencing. So one thing you want to work on, and it will probably require you using less weight than whatever you're using currently. If you're only at body weight, then it's going to require you going slower. Okay, so the key here is to control your descent. Don't drop. You don't want to just kind of like drop this way. You want to control it and actually pause here just for a second and then come back up. Adding that pause can help you, give you a chance to maintain the tension. Keep your legs, your core, your upper body, even your arms, depending what you're doing. Keep everything tight here, and then as you come back up, don't just kind of go, oh, cool, I made it, and relax. Keep everything tight so that your transition from the bottom position back up is key, and you're able to maintain the tension throughout that part of it. Sometimes having knee pain in the bottom part of your squat is because your weight is shifting too far forward. And this kind of picks up where the other one left off as far as a poor transition. So you get to the bottom, you lose kind of the tension, and what happens is your weight kind of shifts forward up on your toes. When you're up on your toes, essentially what you've done is you've turned off your butt muscles, your glutes. They can't contribute when you're up on your toes, which is why you really want to get your heels into the ground. But what happens is people come down and then they come up and then they come forward and then they come back up, and that up face it's a disaster because you've lost your tension, you shifted your weight forward. Once your weight comes off your heels, it's going to put more stress on your thighs and your knees because your hips are basically no longer contributing to the motion much at all. That also opens up your low back, but that's a separate discussion for a different day. So again, similar to what we talked about with the transition video, get to the bottom and make sure your weight stays back, right? If you catch your weight, this is where a pause here can help, because if your weight starts to go forward, get your heels down, then come back up. So slowing the motion down is really important. Cutting your weight temporarily, because sometimes people use too much weight, and then what happens is the focus becomes on, I gotta move this weight so much that they forget about their technique. So in some cases, you're gonna be better off cutting your weight back, slowing down the lowering part, pausing just briefly, and then coming back up under control. Practice that and see if that decreases or takes away your knee pain. One other thing to look at if you have pain in the bottom position of your squat. So you're getting down here, and as you start to head back up, down and through here, you have the pain. And what can happen, and it may happen very quickly, and if you're not paying attention, you may not notice it, but your knees may move in towards one another. And generally speaking, this is not an ideal position for your knee, right? Because your knee is a hinge, it bends and it straightens. This motion here, where my knees come together, it's not a knee motion, it's something that your hips and or your ankles sort of contribute to, but especially when you're under load, if you're coming down here and then this is happening every time, that can put some added stress on the knee joint. And there's really not a lot of upside to letting your knees collapse in like that. So as you get to the bottom position, take time to make sure that your knees stay apart, or just kind of wherever you start with them, they stay lined up there. So if you're a wider stance, that's fine. If you're more narrow, also fine. But make sure that as you get to that transition point, your knees don't do a quick kind of in move and then come back out. And again, it'll be very quick. If you're not sure if you're doing it, what I recommend is set up your camera or your phone or something and take a video of you doing some squats, and take a video of the full set. If you do 8, 10, 12, 15, whatever, and see what happens from the first couple to the last couple, because you may notice that the first half of your reps are pretty good, and then the last half, they kind of get a little sketchy there where the knees are doing some funny things, and you may see some breakdown in your technique as your set extends. Let's say this time you're squatting and you feel pain in just one of your knees, not both of your knees, right? So you're going through the motion, and all of a sudden you've got some pain in one knee as you're going through the squat. What does that mean? So there could be, again, a few different things that it could be. So let's talk about the first one as weight shifting. So a lot of people shift their weight to one side when they squat and don't realize they're doing it. So this can be from an old injury, it could be from weakness, it could be from tightness. The problem is, if you've repeated a motion long enough, your brain learns how to do that incorrectly, but then that incorrect movement becomes normal. So then it feels normal to you to keep doing it even though it's wrong, and it just keeps stressing a certain part of the body. So again, what I would do with this one is to check and see if you're shifting. Start with just some easy body weight squats, and when you get to the bottom, does your hip kind of shift to one side? Do you feel like you've got less weight on one leg versus the other? Sometimes that can be hard to assess. again, setting up your phone, capturing a video of you squatting, having it kind of in front of you so that you can look and see, am I going to one side? Do you notice some kind of a sort of a turn or rotation in your hips? Shifting is actually really common. It's tricky to fix. It does require a lot of really focused reps and really focused effort on your behalf to correct it. But if you catch yourself shifting to one side, you have to correct that. Again, oftentimes it'll require you cutting your weight way back. If you're using weight, maybe going to body weight. If your body weight, maybe actually holding on to something to give you a little bit more assistance. But that can be one of the major things, is that you shift to one side, and then especially if you're under load, right? If I'm kind of going this way, you can see this is not the best position. I want to be here. So that shift will put a lot of stress on one side of the body more so than the other. Sometimes with shifting during a squat, it is really load dependent. So during your body weight squat, everything looks great. Or if you deloaded it, it looks great. But then you get to a certain point where the load actually is the contributing factor. So you're using too much weight, and or you could be squatting too deep. There could be other things. The type of squat you're doing may not be the best. We'll talk about that later on. So be very aware that even though it looks great deloaded, it looks great body weight, lightweight, it looks good, but when you get to that point maybe where you're pushing a little bit harder, a little bit heavier, you start to get that kick to the side where you're shifting. That still should not be allowed. That's still not okay. Just because you're using heavy weight doesn't mean that you can allow your technique to break down. Your technique should still be good with the heavier weight. You just may not get as many reps as you get with the lighter weight. So pay attention to where the shift occurs. Now, it also might occur later in a set. For example, if you're squatting with, we'll just say 200 pounds, and your first 5 reps look good, but then the next 3 or 4 you start to shift, there's a fatigue component to that as well. So it might not be there right away, but again, regardless of where it shows up, whether it's with a bodyweight squat, whether it's later in your set, whether it's with a heavier weight, the key is you have to correct it. How you correct it, well, there's a bunch of ways we could talk about doing that, but the key is you have to do something. You cannot just power through and keep doing those reps while shifting to the side. You have to make some sort of a correction, whether it's fewer reps, whether it's breaking up your set. For example, doing a set of 5 and 5 to get 10 versus 10 in a row. Nothing wrong with that. It actually manages fatigue and it preserves your technique. So those are things you can do. It might just be cutting back the weight. There's maybe adding longer rest periods in between your sets. There's a lot of ways to manage those situations. The key is you have to do something. Ignoring it, powering through it, that should never be an option. Sometimes your knee pain when squatting or when sitting and standing is simply a product of how you're doing it. So if you know somebody, whether it's yourself, maybe a family member, a friend, who that every time they sit down, they tend to crash onto the couch or the chair, and they don't come down gracefully, even remotely. They come down like a big old hot mess and just boom, they crash. And they're kind of like, bang, it's like, wow, what the heck is that all about? Well, there's a reason why that oftentimes happens. And the thing is, it's not a strength issue. It's more of a physics issue. So, and this is true for anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're younger, whether you're older, whether you're male, female, whether you exercise or not. Basically, if you squat down and your torso gets vertical too soon, you are going to tip over. So hopefully I don't fall out of the screen here, but basically, if I squat down this way, no problem. But if I'm gonna come down this way, I'm gonna move my torso vertical almost right away, and you're gonna see what happens to my squat. When I come down and I go back this way, I'm gonna fall back every time. It's not a strength issue. Once your torso gets too far behind your knees, you're going to tip over. So if you or somebody you know sits down like that almost every time, chances are they're gonna struggle with sitting and standing. And if you have them actually squat, they're gonna do the same thing. They're gonna actually fall back onto a bench or some boxes or whatever they're squatting to. So the key with that one is to change how you're doing it. So let's talk about that next. So to correct the knee pain with the vertical torso position, you have to work on hinging at your hips. You gotta learn how to dig your heels into the ground, how to push your butt back. So one of the things I used to coach a lot of my patients to do when I was at the hospital working as a physical therapist was to use their hands on their legs to kind of A, give them support, but B, also help to kind of get their hips moving back, okay? So we would put a chair behind them. What I want them to do, because most people, they do this and then they fall. So what I want them to do is put their hands here, get your butt back, and kind of come forward this way. So I'm nice and balanced right here. Surprisingly, you'll get a good amount of assistance by just placing your hands on your legs, both for lowering yourself down and when you go to get back up. So hands here, and it takes people a while to get used to this. They want to straighten up so desperately, and they want to fall, they don't want to fall back, but they're so used to it. So it takes time to get them to get into this position where they're comfortable doing it. But that's the first thing you have to do, is learn how to hinge through your hips. Because if you don't, you will continue to fall back. And again, in that position, right, so it's tough for me to show, but my knee falls back behind my ankle the more I do this. This is why, if you have ever done the squats with you're up against the wall with a ball behind your back, or using the Smith machine at a gym to do squats, those are not very good options, because they literally put you in that vertical torso position with your knees way out in front. Again, the problem with that position is, A, it's not how you're going to sit and stand or squat anyway, and it puts your knees kind of out on an island with no help from your glutes. So those exercises are really not good options. They're not, I don't want to say they're bad. However, they don't really reinforce good mechanics. They don't help to teach you how to sit and stand properly. And if you already had knee pain, those are probably not going to do a whole heck of a lot to help get rid of your knee pain. You really have to spend time learning how to get your heels down, get your butt back, use support here if you need it, but learn how to hinge through the hips so that you control that vertical torso position and you stop from falling backwards onto whatever surface you're aiming for. Another reason you may be experiencing knee pain when you squat is because you're squatting through too much range of motion. You're going too deep into the squat. So this can be problematic for a number of reasons. Not everybody can squat all the way down. Sometimes this is referred to as ass to grass, basically meaning you're gonna put your butt all the way down. So you're coming down all the way like this and coming all the way back up. Now, doing that as a body weight movement versus loaded up with a barbell or dumbbells or whatever, two very different things, okay? Not everybody can squat like that body weight, and even fewer people are gonna do that when under load. So if somebody's telling you you have to squat that way, they're an idiot, and no, you don't. What you need to find is the right range of motion for your body, understanding that it's gonna be very different than other people's, and then it's probably going to change over time, because ankle mobility can limit your squat, hip mobility can limit your squat, core stability or lack thereof can limit your squat, even sort of flexibility and mobility through your upper back can limit your squat. So a lot of things go into contributing why people can and cannot squat all the way down. The type of squat you perform also matters too and will contribute. So the key is, when it comes to depth, it's highly variable. And it's highly variable for reasons that are also out of your control. But the key is, do not force depth. Do not force range of motion. Find what works for you right now and work within that. Knowing that you may squat deeper with good technique in time, but you have to earn that. Just forcing the body to go into a position it does not want to go into is never going to help you get where you want to go. So one of the reasons squat depth is so variable from person to person has to do with our skeleton. Something that we cannot fix or change or do anything with. We have to work with whatever we have. So the key here, and I'm gonna go a little bit, I'm gonna give you the nerd alert right now. We're gonna go into a little bit of anatomy, but I'll keep it basic just so you get the basic idea of why forcing yourself to squat deep may not be a good idea. So your thigh bone, also known as your femur, at the top of it, it angles in like this way, where it meets up with the socket in the hip bone. Well, this angle right here is different for different people. So it could be more of a 90-degree angle. It could maybe be, open up and be more like 130, 135 degrees. So that is going to be different person to person. You have no control over that. You cannot fix that. Also, the position of the socket, right? So it could be more towards the outside. It could be more towards the front, maybe angled down a little bit. Again, things that you have no control over, but will limit your ability to move in certain positions in certain ways. So when you're looking at squat depth, make sure you find a depth that is comfortable for you. Again, start with that, knowing that you might get more in time, but forcing your body to go to a point that it really can't go, and it's just really uncomfortable, is only going to make things worse for you, and it's going to continue to cause knee pain. And if you keep doing it, that knee pain is going to become hip pain and probably back pain. It's just going to keep working right up your body. So make sure you find the depth that's right for you. So how do you figure out what's a good squat depth for you? Well, if you're new to squatting, or if you're having knee pain with squatting, squatting to some kind of a surface is a no-brainer. You really should be doing it, okay? So I have some steps set up here. If you're at home, you could squat to the couch, the arm of the couch, chair, maybe throw a couple pillows on top to find that right depth or that right height for you, but find something. Don't just, doing sort of a freestanding squat is great, but when you're trying to learn how to do it, having a target really does make a big difference. It does help to make sure that each rep is the same, right? So that you're getting your butt down the same way each time. It also gives you a way to sort of progress or regress, and I'll show you what I mean in a second, but find something, okay? What I typically do when somebody's new to squatting or when I meet somebody for the first time is we sit and we always kind of work from the bottom up because it allows us to set up the position. So I'll show you both from the front, and then I'll also kind of swing over to the side and show you more of a side profile. So again, find a position that's good for you. Set your feet a certain distance apart, right? And then kind of scoot to the edge of your seat, okay? That's important. I want to get to this point so I can get my body forward, okay, to this position. Don't squat like this. Remember we talked about that vertical torso position earlier. I can't stand up like this. So what people tend to do is they throw their body forward and they come up that way. That's a lot of my spine going forward and straightening up. That's no good. So what you want to do, scoot your butt to the forward. And I talked about putting your hands on your legs. Use it in the beginning to help you get used to the technique. Most times when my clients or patients have knee pain and I show them how to do this, they can actually squat without knee pain. So their knees are actually fine. It's how they were doing it that was the issue, right? So what I want you to do is lean forward with your hands on your legs, okay? Think about pushing your heels into the floor, squeeze your butt muscles, and then stand up. And then when you go to sit back down, same thing. Lead with the hips, hands on the legs, come down, and sit. So the key is once you get the hang of that, what I encourage people to do in the beginning is to sit between each rep. So I'm going to do 3 reps and show you what I mean. So I come up on the first one, I come back down, and I sit. I reset into my second rep. Come back down, and I sit. One more time, I come up, and I come back down, and I sit. So if you can do a set of those and there's no knee pain, that's fantastic. The next step is to do what I call a tap and go. This time you're going to come down, you're going to tap your butt to the box and come back up. What this starts to look at is your transition, which we talked about before. Most people's transitions are not very good. So if you can sit and stand with no pain sitting in between each rep, and then you go to come down, I'm going to do a tap and go where I come down and I tap the box and come back up. If that causes pain, then we know your transition is the issue. It's not the squat. It's at that bottom position is where you're losing tension, you're losing control of the motion. So box squatting for depth and for retraining that motion are critical. So start with the sitting between each rep, progress to the tap and go, and see what happens to your symptoms. If they come back, then you just have to work on that transition a little bit more, and it gives you that information so you know that the squat in and of itself is actually fine. It's how you're doing it that was the issue. Another source of knee pain when squatting is forcing your foot in kind of hip position. So again, a lot of times people are told they have to squat a certain way. They have to go really wide. They have to go narrow. They have to keep their feet straight ahead. They have to turn their toes out. You don't have to do any of those things. What you need to do is whatever works for you. Again, I talked about in one of the other videos about the hip anatomy and how different it is, so that depending on how your skeleton is put together, yeah, you might do great with a wide stance squat with your toes turned out, and you may squat and feel awesome. Somebody else, that could cause them both hip and knee pain. So the key when you're learning how to squat, and if you do have some pain, play around with how wide your feet are, bring your feet closer together, turn them out slightly, put them straight ahead. Generally speaking, people don't typically squat with their toes turned in, so I wouldn't even try that one. But you may find that with the toes turned out slightly, you feel better and you feel less pain. So the key, just like squat depth, it's highly variable from person to person. Find a position that works for you, whether it's wide, narrow, toes out, toes straight ahead. Find what works for you. And if anybody tells you that you have to do it a certain way, they're an idiot. Don't listen to them. Find out what works for you, stick with that, and practice that. That'll help you get out of pain. If you couple that with the box squats and working through your progressions, I think you'll find out that any knee pain that you once had is slowly gonna just go away, and you'll be able to squat pain-free in no time. So sometimes when people are squatting, they get to the bottom position, and I mentioned this before, their heels kind of come up off the ground. Well, why is that? You know, and it could be really there's two main causes for that, for the most part. The first is actually ankle mobility. Your ankles are so stinking tight that when they get to it, they get locked up, and there's no other point. They either go up this way, or your spine has to start to collapse around that, neither of which are very good. So sometimes if you notice that you're struggling with squats and your heels are coming up, your ankles are just really tight. One little test you can do, and I would do this strictly as an assessment. I would not squat this way, but put something under your heels, something small, maybe like a small 5-pound plate, maybe a mat, like a yoga mat might be too thin, but something small. Put it under your heels, squat down, and see if it feels any different. If you notice that, oh wow, that feels easier, that feels less painful, then there's a very good chance that ankle mobility is part of the issue why you're struggling with your squat and why your heels are popping up. The other thing that could be contributing is something we've talked about already. It's the hip hinge. Being able to effectively get your hips and your butt back and do that throughout the entire motion. A lot of people struggle with hip hinging. It's a simple idea, but it's not easy to do. So if you're unfamiliar with that, again, the whole idea with the hip hinge is that you pivot through the hip joint when you move. So when you squat, you want to come down this way, right? I'm pivoting here, which allows my upper body, it's coming forward, but it's coming forward because I'm pivoting through my hip, not because I'm rounding my back. So the hip hinge is very, very important for almost all weight-bearing lower body exercises. And if you couple a poor hip hinge with ankle mobility issues, yeah, your squat is going to be a dumpster fire, and you're probably going to have not just knee pain, but probably pain a lot of other places as well. So check your ankle mobility, and then really double down and nail your hip hinge. Get good at it, because it's going to show up in pretty much every lower body movement you do that have your feet on the ground. Because of the popularity of the back squat, I'm going to spend some time kind of talking about it, why it is a good exercise, but why it may not be the best option for you depending on what your goals are and things like that. So first off, the back squat is when you have the bar resting behind your head as opposed to in front of your head, on your shoulders, okay? So some people struggle to get into the position just under an empty bar alone. So look at this picture here. If you can't get up against the wall, flat against the wall, head and shoulders back, with your arms up against the wall at the same time, if you can't get there, you should not be squatting with the bar. At least not back squat anyway, because again, I'm going to go the wrong way in the squat right here just so you can see what's going on here, but I have to get under here and I got to get my arms back, right? So if I can't do this up against the wall, right from your setup, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems because your shoulders are going to be moved in a certain position. Usually the head is pushed forward, the low back is excessively arched, and your weight tends to get pushed onto your your toes a little bit more. It's very difficult to do this when you're really so tight. It's tough to keep your weight back because everything is pushing you forward. Okay, so the first thing I would do is, before you even get under the bar, go up against the wall and assess where you are. Because again, if you can't get to the position where you can rest here comfortably, then if I'm pushed all forward here, it's gonna be very difficult for me not to end up moving forward, okay? So the key really with back squats is not whether they're good or bad. It's a very good exercise, just not great with the straight bar for everybody because of some of the mobility issues that people have with their shoulders, their upper back, general posture type stuff. So before you load up here, go against the wall like the picture I showed. If you can't get to that position, don't jump under the bar. I would say work on those things. I'm going to share some alternatives to the back squat that you can use in place of for now, but figure out why you can't get your arms there, right? Because maybe it's shoulder issues, maybe it's some posture, thoracic issues, who knows, but address those things, and then you can come back to this guy. But the good news is there are some great alternatives to doing the back squat in case you have a hard time getting yourself under the bar. So let's say you checked out your range of motion and you cannot get your arms against the wall, but you would like to squat with the bar somehow. What do? So instead of doing a back squat, you could do front squat. So again, the front and back simply refer to the position of the bar. The back squat behind your head, right back here. Front squat is gonna be resting across the shoulders in front of your head. So the mechanics are a little bit different between the two. You typically won't handle as much weight with the front squat, but some people prefer the front squat to the back squat, I being one of them. Back squats have never felt great, even though I have the range of motion and all that. Back squats have always just felt awkward for me. Front squats feel better for me, so I tend to do more of those. Now, with front squats, the trick is sort of the setup. It's not the most comfortable thing at first. It takes a little getting used to in terms of what do you do with your hands? How do you get yourself situated? So I'll show you a couple of different options you can do in regards to the front squat. So basically what you need to do is you need to get under the bar. So it's going to be on top of your shoulders. The bar is going to be very close to your throat, your neck. So, but your hand position can sort of mitigate that being sort of a really big problem. So I, over the years, have experimented with a lot of different versions, variations of this. Sometimes what people do is more of like they'll kind of get into a position where they're up like this, which is fine if you have the range of, if you have the flexibility here. If your arms aren't too big, if you have really big arms, it's going to be tough to kind of bend your arms back and kind of get under the bar this way. So you can, that's one option. Another option is simply to go under the bar here, and I'll actually step out this way for you. So just getting in here, right? So here, the bar is resting on my shoulders, so I can cross this way, and then my hands hold the bar, and then it keeps it off my neck. And then the key with front squats is that when you squat down, you can't let your elbows drop, because then the bar is going to come rolling right down your arms onto the floor, your feet, or something else. So you can go this way, right? So you keep the elbows that way. One thing that I've done more recently that I like better is actually just doing this. So it's kind of like the first one, but it offers a lot more flexibility in terms of where you put your hands, and to me it's less stressful on my upper body. So here, and same idea, keep the elbows up and you squat down that way. Another option you could do, if you have some kind of a wrist wrap or even a band, is you tie it around and then you hold it up this way. So you basically hold the arms up here as you squat down. All of those are great options for the front squat, and the front squat is a great option if you want to get under the bar to squat but are unable to get into the back squat position. Another great option for squatting with a bar without doing back squats is using the yoke bar. If you have access to one of these, they are absolutely fantastic. So what they allow you to do, so check out the picture here, it allows you to get your hands out in front of your body even though the bar is behind you. So it solves kind of all the problems you have with the back squat because the bar is still behind you, so the load can be a little heavier, but your hands are out front here, so if you can't get into the position, no worries, the bar takes care of that for you. So the yoke squat, if you have access to a bar, is a phenomenal alternative. Now, one thing I will mention though is that you can see here the handles hang straight down. Why does that matter? What does that mean? Well, it means that the bar, when the bar's on your shoulders, the handles are going to want to drop down naturally. So it's going to want to pull you a little bit more into a rounded upper back position. So you do have to be mindful of that. You have to keep a little bit of, when you hold on to the handles, keep a little bit of upward kind of pressure, not so far where you throw it off your back, but enough where you kind of hold up here and don't get into this position as you go through the squat. So if you have access to a yoke bar for squats, even for lunges, it's an absolutely fantastic alternative to back squats. Another great option for squatting with weight without having to use the back squat or even a bar for that. For this example, is a goblet squat. So I think, because you hold your the weight this way, I'm guessing it's because your hands kind of look like a little bit of a goblet, maybe. So what does a goblet squat look like? So check out the video here. Basically, you hold the weight here, cradle it against your chest, go through your range of motion, can be used with or without a box. You can load it up, actually fairly heavy. Goblet squats are great. It's actually the first sort of progression after sort of body weight box squats. This is where I go with all my clients, teach them how to squat with their body weight first, then we give them the dumbbell, we practice their goblet squats, and it allows them to load up in a safe way, and it still allows us to work on all the little pieces of the technique that we've talked about along the way here, but it's a great alternative to squatting, especially if you have trouble getting into that sort of back squat position. Try the goblet squat.